President Muhammadu Buhari has inaugurated an advisory technical committee for the implementation of the proposed 30,000 new minimum wage for Nigerian workers. Now, he also announced that the federal government would review the salaries of workers currently earning above the national minimum wage. The appointment of the advisory committee comes a day after the Nigerian Labour Congress held a nationwide protest over the wage demand. Well, according to the president, the renegotiation will commence shortly after the passage of the new minimum wage law. Now, the committee's terms of reference include proposing a work plan and modalities for implementation. Now, the committee is headed by a popular economist and chief executive officer of financial derivatives company, Bismarck Rewani. Well, the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf, joins me now via Skype from Commerce House in Victoria Island here in Lagos. And from our Abuja studio, I have an economist, Ayo Oyalowo, who's also standing by to talk more and make more sense of all of these developments. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon.
Let me start from Lagos. Now, DG, what do you make of this committee? I saw your comment that you're saying that they would come out with, something that would actually address all the challenges, talking about raising these funds and proper implementation of this 30,000 proposed minimum wage.
Well, just as the name implies, it's a technical committee. I think their mandate is to put forward a framework for the implementation of the minimum wage, a realistic framework. But the big issue here is the capacity to fund. Even in the inauguration, I think the president highlighted this point, that part of the advice that they expect from the committee is to come up with proposals on how to get the revenue to fund the minimum wage. Note that this is clearly a tall order. It's even a bigger issue even for the states, because I'm aware that the states have been complaining that there's no way they can pay this minimum wage if they have to retain the current workforce. So it's going to be a very tough order. It's going to be a very difficult thing. There are economic issues, there are also political issues, especially coming at a time like this. But the technical committee, I'm sure, will come up with a very realistic position, a position that is sustainable, and a position that may not be that popular within the political structure or political system. But just as there have been times, it's not a political team, it's a technical team. Oh. And the good thing is that it's headed by an economist. He will be able to put all the facts on the table. So whether the solution will now be acceptable to labor or not is what we wait to see. But clearly, we have a major revenue challenge in this instance. We have a major issue with how the states can come on board, because already we have a very serious lopsided structure between current expenditure and capital expenditure. And this situation may increase the recurrent expenditure to between 30 to 40% for many of the states. So it's a very, very challenging situation, in my view.
Okay, then now let me go to Ayo Oyalowo now, who is an economist. Now, Ayo, let's look at the this committee, those that are other players talking about the LRFRS chairman. We have also Ben Akabueze looking at the quality and this set of people in this committee being led by Bismarck Rewani. I want us to start that way. As an economist yourself, what are your expectations?
My expectation, good afternoon once again. My expectations are wonderful, are bright. Because when you look at the composition of the committee, and you must agree with me that Bismarck is one of the best economists we have in Nigeria. He's been consistent, he's been forthright, and his views are highly respected both nationally and internationally. So I think he will bring his experience to bear on the committee. And then when you look at the Ben Akaboizes and the other people on the committee, I think for the first time the Nigerian workers are getting a good deal. So in my opinion, this is the way to go. It is obvious that the federal government is very open. The federal government is very transparent in their dealings, so that when the final report is given, and you realize they were given just 2 weeks, so which means there's no room for dilly-dally, for foot dragging. So by the time this committee is done with their job, we should all be proud of what will have been done, and the Nigerian workers will be the beneficiary and will be the better for this committee and whatever job they are able to do, and the result they will present to the federal government as their report when they are done looking at whatever they are doing. So I think it's a plus for both the federal government and the workers.
Ayo, a follow-up to that is the fact that you know that we have a major revenue challenge, and the price of crude just today now we got to $60 per barrel, which is our main source of revenue. Now, Ayo, sincerely, don't you see one way or the other inflation jumping up, or one it might be a negative effect one way or the other if we go ahead with what is on ground?
Well, there is always a challenge of this. If this happens, the next thing will happen. But I think the committee will do a good job and will give recommendation that will help the government to be able to cushion whatever effect this happens to have on the long run. Because the truth is, 18,000 naira is not sustainable. It's too small when you look at in the grand scheme of things. Even 30,000 naira is not too huge. So I don't think it's a bad thing. What we should just do is look for opportunities to expand our revenue base. And from what FIRS has been saying, it is clear that they are trying to work on expanding the tax net. So if we're able to get more people into the tax net, there are more people paying tax. I mean, an economy like Britain is basically run on taxation. So it is not a big deal that crude oil is not doing well. And anybody who has understanding, I have been saying this consistently, that crude oil will never go as high as 150 like it did some 6-7 years back. So we should never expect that crude oil will be consistently high and that will fund our budget and our expenditure. Therefore, the government should look at other ways of expanding our revenue base. So I don't think it will be too much of a challenge, because I have implicit confidence in this committee that they will be able to do a good job and give good recommendation that will not create too much shocks to the economy.
All right. My next question goes to DG LCCI, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Now, Ayo has expressed confidence in this committee. We know there was a tripartite committee that came out with a report before it was now supposed to be moved to the National Assembly to make it law. And some are saying, do we really need this advisory committee? How do you think Labour will react to this?
Well, the beauty of the advisory committee is that it is not a government-led committee. It's a committee that has a good dose of technocrats from the private sector. So that has brought some credibility, or will bring some credibility to the process of looking at the figures and coming up with a framework that is realistic and that is sustainable. Some of the options that I can see on the table for this to be realizable, first is to review the issue of revenue allocation. Because the states have consistently said that it is not possible for them to pay this wage if we maintain the current level of revenue allocation. Currently, the federal government is taking about 53% of the revenue from federation accounts. The states are taking 27%. The local governments are taking 20%. And if you look at the balance of the burden of the payment of these salaries, the burden is more on the states and the local governments. So we need to quickly deal with the issue of revenue allocation. Secondly, we need to also deal with the issue of the size of the workforce. Many of the states are carrying a workforce that is clearly not sustainable. So we also have to be realistic. If this 30,000 has to be paid, there have to be some trade-off in terms of the size of the workforce. Most of them actually are carrying a workforce that are not sustainable, and in many cases that are not even needed. Sometimes if you look at the size of the bureaucracy in many of the states, to be looking more like a social security scheme than actually proper employment. Because you have a large percentage that are not doing much or not even doing anything. So we need to address that. We also need to address globally the issue of social spending. Because part of the pressures on the average worker is the pressure on the payment of school fees. Most of them, because of the collapse of public school system and inadequate funding of the public schools, most of them have to put their children in private schools. And these things are very, very expensive. The same thing with health services. Because of the collapse of the public health institutions, a lot of people have to go to the private hospitals. These things are also not cheap. Then you have the issue of public transportation. You don't have effective mass transit across the country. And if you are taking a public transportation, commercial buses, whether you are a manager, you are a messenger, you pay the same amount. So we need to look at the issues that are also affecting the real income of workers that is creating this kind of burden on them. We also need to look at macroeconomic issues so that we have a situation where the real income, the purchasing power is also not eroded too rapidly. There was a time in this country with 6,000 naira, you could buy a brand new car. With 3,000, 4,000, you could buy a brand new car in this same generation. So what has happened to the quality, to the strength of the currency? Okay. To come to a point now where you need millions of naira to be able to buy a car, a brand new car, 15 million, 20 million. So we also need to deal with macroeconomic issues so that we ensure that whatever a worker is taking home is not eroded by inflation. All right. So we have to take all these things together to be able to come up with something that is sustainable, something that is realistic.
All right, DG, your thoughts there are talking about something sustainable and something realizable. I just got a tweet. I wish to read this out. It said there should be a pay formula for Nigerian states, you know, like for the 36 states, everybody should have. Well, someone is just suggesting that. My next question goes to Ayo. Let's do a little bit of comparative analysis now of minimum wage across the African continent. We have South Africa paying about $252 per month. Egypt doing $174 per month. Uganda is doing $1.62. Nigeria is doing $50. Now let's look at this. What do you make of these figures? You know, you talked earlier about Britain leaving on tax. So what are you looking at? Value-added tax. South Africa, we have 15%. Egypt, 14%. So a lot of figures here.
Exactly where I was going to, that is where I was going to hold you. That, you see, before we do this comparison, we have to be very careful. Because in South Africa, VAT is 15%. Luxury VAT is 20%. I was there just about 6 weeks ago. So I can tell you clearly, if we start doing this comparison, we're going to create a lot of problems. You have to look at our earnings first. You have to look at our population too. Right now, we are taking the step nicely. Our VAT is the lowest in our region. So it will say clearly why our minimum wage is not the highest too. South Africa, minimum wage is $252, while Nigeria is $50. But a liter of petrol in South Africa is between 459 naira and 480 naira, depending on the grade you are buying, between 17 to 19 rands. So if you start this comparison, we're going to create so much problem. The cost of buying a liter of petrol, cost of paying VAT is far higher in those countries than we have here. So you can understand that. So if you want to raise the bar, then we can quickly raise everything. Raise the minimum wage to maybe, let's say, 100,000 per month. Then we raise VAT to 15%. then raise, remove complete subsidy, and then oil, fuel price go to 200 naira or 300. So you see, that is the danger. So I don't think we should do this kind of comparison because it will make life very uncomfortable. And if you look at, for instance, Egypt that you just cited there, if you look at the rate of inflation there, it is quite very high. I don't have the exact figure, but I know it's more than 3 times what we have here in Nigeria. So we need to be very careful when we do this comparison. When you raise minimum wage from 18 to 30, it's fair. Maybe you can say in a few years we can raise gradually, but to shoot it up that high at once, you are going to create so much disequilibrium, and that disequilibrium is going to affect the entire market. And I don't think we have enough buffer to handle that shock.
Let me ask DG the same question. DG, let's look at South Africa that we tend to always compare, looking at our GDP and all of that. Now, what would you say about minimum wage in some African countries compared to what we have in our climate?
Well, we have to compare apple with apple. If you look at some of these other countries, they have quality public educational system. Some of them are even free. So that means for the workers in those countries, they don't have to put pressure on their income to pay school fees. The same thing happens with some of their public health institutions. For many of them, they have public health institutions that function. Therefore, the workers don't have to worry too much about having to pay for medical bills in private hospitals. Many of them also have functioning mass transit system, so that with very little amount, they can go to work and come back and move around from place to place. But those things don't exist here. They need to look at the quality of their infrastructure. As a household, do they run all the time on generators? Do you have to be buying petrol all the time? So all these things we have to put into consideration when we are comparing. We don't just compare the nominal figures. We compare those social expenditure that the government is also incurring to take away the pressure of existence, the pressure of living from the workers and lighten the burden. So we have to be very holistic in the way we compare minimum wage in one country with what exists in another country.
All right, Director
But
General.
the things that government provides vary from country to country.
All right, Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf from Lagos Victoria Island. Yes, thank you very much for your time. And Ayo Oyalowo from our Abuja studios. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you, gentlemen. That's our show. Thank you for watching. I'm Tolu Lokwe Ogunjobi. See you tomorrow.